Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So I think it goes without saying that YCS Anaheim was one of the craziest weekends in Yu-Gi-Oh's entire history. At the start, yeah, the main story was crossover breakers bringing Ryzeal and Malice into the game, and watching those strategies just take over the format right away. But then we saw Triff go ahead, barely make it into top cut, taking 32nd place, and then go on to win the entire event. And then to round it off, we had probably the best way that Konami has ever revealed a ban list ever, with them doing that live in front of that huge crowd and on stream. Guys, the atmosphere in that room was like so electric, it was actually crazy. So yeah, crazy stuff. It has given us a lot to talk about. Let's get started. Alright, now kicking things off, we're gonna take a look at Malice White Rabbit. So, of course, a lot of the things I'll say here will apply to Malice and Underground as well. They're both key parts of the same deck from the same set, and they came out in the same rarities. Now, I think that going into YCS Anaheim, a lot of players were on the fence about Malice. Over in the OCG, Ryzeal is a much better deck than the rest of the decks in the format. I think Ryzeal is considered S tier, and Malice is only like A or B. However, I do think that YCS Anaheim proved that the gap between the two decks is a lot smaller than people think. Malice is able to keep up with a lot of the Ryzeal decks, as they did take 6 spots in the top 32 compared to 10 from Ryzeal. Now, to be fair, a lot of the Malice players were taken out by the top 8. I think only one made it that far. But we probably also have to remember that decks like Tenpai and Yubel probably won't have that same representation in the top cut anymore, so we will see some of that deck breakdown consolidated by the time that YCS Orlando rolls around. So at Anaheim, I personally was really wanting to pick up the Malice cards on Friday. I didn't have them yet, and a friend of mine had a French quarter swap with me, and at the time, White Rabbit and Underground were going for around $30 for the Ultras. However, by Saturday morning, the card was already $40, and right now the cheapest copy available on TCG Player is $47. We did see a very similar jump with Underground as well, as both cards are now well over the $40 mark for the cheapest printing, and they're both currently more expensive than even the Ryzeal Ultra Rares. The scary thing is that the high rarity printings are trending upwards as well. The collector's rare version of White Rabbit was around $70, it's now up to $125 lowest on TCG Player, though the most that one has sold for is right at around $100. And then the crazier thing is that the QCR sits at the top of the entire set, coming in at $170 to $180 before. We now have sold listings at almost the $400 mark. Definitely some insane prices, but it does kind of make sense for a deck that's a waifu deck. It overperformed on its opening weekend, and it wasn't touched at all by a ban list that just dropped. So hopefully, if you do want to play the deck, you have your core already. I am not expecting these prices to come down too much more anytime soon. Next up, we have to take a look at Fiendsmith Engraver. Now, I personally wasn't expecting it, but the Fiendsmith cards were absolutely everywhere at YCS Anaheim. The top tables were consistently full of the pure Fiendsmith deck, which does typically also use Kashtira cards to help fill out the strategy, but it was also used alongside Ryzeal a lot. That's the deck that Triff was playing to win the whole event. The Fiendsmith cards are really cool, since they can really supplement your end board with things like Desiree and Caesar, and even just having access to Lacrima is cool because she's a level 4 body that you generally don't need to burn your normal summon on. On top of that, the Fiendsmith cards actually made it through the ban list completely untouched, probably because they haven't seen as much usage since Beatrice and Fusion Lacrima were banned. Now, about a month and a half ago, we took a look at Engraver, and it had bounced back up to around $60. Back then, it was unclear exactly where Engraver would be in the format, since we weren't sure if the new decks would be using it, as well as if it would see a hit on the upcoming ban list. Well, we now know that the engine can be used by the Ryzeal strategy, and the engine was not touched at all, so we've actually seen Engraver shoot way up in price. When this card came out, it was around $110 to $120. It had fallen to around $50 to $60, but we actually now have Engraver rebounding back up to the $100 mark, given all of the play that it saw at YCS Anaheim. Expect this card to fall back a little bit down in price as the Anaheim Aftermath does wear off. It'll probably still be around the $80 mark for quite a while. Theoretically, this card won't be reprinted until the 2025 tins, but given the popularity of the engine, I would not be surprised if Konami slipped it into an upcoming side set as an additional chase card. I do want to take a second to remind all of you to check out our website, MSTmerch.com. Now, over at MSTmerch.com, we have everything that you will need to optimize your Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament experience. We have the basics with white, black, pink, and our new purple matted sleeves, which are my personal favorites, as well as smooth and matted sleeves to double sleeve your valuable cards and sleeves with for tournament play. But we also have some other items that you can really use to customize your collection. We have amazing foil sleeves, including some with the MST.TV logo, and dividers and subdividers so that you can keep your collection perfectly organized and easily accessible. Regardless of if you're a competitive or casual player, I'm certain that you'll find something that you will enjoy over at MSTmerch.com. On to the next card, we have Kashtira Unicorn. So aside from the Fiendsmith engine, another engine that was incredibly popular at Anaheim was the Kashtira cards. Typically, we just saw Fenrir, Unicorn, Birth, and Raitsoth, and it was used not only alongside the Fiendsmith cards, but it was actually in some Malice lists as well. I believe that Jeff Jones played a small Kashtira engine in his Malice list and made it to the top 32. Now, historically, Fenrir is known as the card that gets splashed into everything, but Unicorn is a really strong standalone monster as well. It can rip cards out of your opponent's extra deck, which can be really devastating in certain matchups, and it effectively is multiple bodies since it searches for Birth, which can bring it back after you use it. I do think that a lot of players realize just how strong the Kashtira cards are, so a lot of them are probably afraid of the Kashtira cards potentially being hit on a ban list. Over in the OCG, Unicorn is limited and Fenrir is banned, but we have both cards still at 3 here. I do think that gradually this could be a thing that really separates the way that decks are built and played between the TCG and OCG. Historically, Unicorn isn't a super expensive card. Just a couple of weeks ago, the card was sitting at around $4 to $5 each for either the original Ultra Rare or Tin's reprint Secret Rare. Now, however, either version is going to cost you $10 to $12, so a double up in price over the course of the last week. Personally, I do think that Unicorn and Fenrir are going to be in the quarter century Stampede set, since there is still a chance for Konami to cash in on the popularity of those cards, though they could definitely be hit on the ban list shortly after that, depending on how much play they see. Only time will tell us for sure, but personally, I'd only be holding onto a playset of each of these cards at most. Alright, the next card here is Artifact Sanctum. So this card is pretty straightforward. It's a trap card that special summons an artifact monster from the deck. Now, over in the OCG, this card is a really strong side deck option. The main thing is that Artifact Scythe isn't banned over there, so Sanctum grants you access to either Scythe or Lancia. Here in the TCG, however, Scythe is banned, so you really only have access to Lancia. Now, Lancia is still really good and a strong card. It basically single-handedly shuts down Malice, so having access to Lancia consistently is really strong. And this is something that Triff actually ran a copy of in the side deck. He ran a single copy of Sanctum to search off of Thrust, and it helped with winning matchups against Malice decks for its increased access to Lancia. Because of this, we've seen 2 different printings of Sanctum go up in price. We have the original Ultra Rares from Primal Origin, and then the Secret Rares from Battles of Legend. Both of these copies are coming in at $10 each, which is a pretty big jump up from the $3 to $4 that they were at before. Before you jump on it though, the card does have 2 other Ultra printings from reprint sets, and it's also available as a common from the Trap Trick Structure deck. The main thing is that Scythe is banned, so I feel like running 3 Lancia and Sanctum, it might be fine, but it might be overkill depending on how the format shapes up. At the same time though, Sanctum is a really important card back in hat format, which is starting to see some popularity as a Time Wizard format, and the player base could grow in the future. Ultimately, if you want these higher end printings, that's up to you. Personally, I would settle for picking up the Ultra Rares from Battles of Legend Armageddon, which are only a couple of dollars each but still look pretty clean. Here's a bit of an odd one. It's Varudras, the Final Bringer of the End Times. This card is a generic ranked 10 Xyz monster that's really strong. Basically, it's one of the few generic Omni Negates for the extra deck in the game, and on top of that, it has a couple of effects that allow it to destroy cards as well. Now, ever since this card's release, I've always thought it could be really strong. It just took the right deck to be able to make it and abuse it. The one place that this card did see play in was Yubel, which of course can bring out level 10 monsters quite easily, but now with Phantom of Yubel limited to 1, I think that the deck will have a bit of a harder time making it. However, the one deck that can make it really easily is the Yugioh, which is the third mostly forgotten theme that came out in Crossover Breakers. Their monsters are level 10, and even though they didn't have any sort of showing at YCS Anaheim, I do think that they could see some success at the regional level, supplementing decks like Dinomorphia and then Pure Dinos. Because of this, Varudris did see a spike in price over the weekend. When Yubel first started playing this card, we saw it at a high of around $15. For the most part, it's been like a $7 to $8 card. Now, however, we have these secret rares shot all the way up to over $20 per copy, which is the highest that the card has been aside from its release weekend. Personally, I'm not convinced that Ryuga is going to do too much. It seems like the sort of engine that just adds a lot of bricks to your deck. But if you are picking up the Ryuga core while it is dirt cheap, you may as well pick up a copy of Varudris to go with it. This one I just want to mention briefly, it's Saphira, Dragon Queen of the Voiceless Voice. So recently I think that the Voiceless Voice deck has completely fallen off the map. It just really struggles to keep up with all of the other decks in the format. However, there are a couple of reasons to keep an eye on the cards for the strategy. The first is that the deck did actually manage to make top 32 at YCS Anaheim, which is a pretty impressive showing. The second is that I did see some lists in the OCG that were like Voiceless Voice Ryziel, where you use Skull Guardian as an Omni Negate to protect your Ryziel cards. The idea is cool, especially because I think a boosted Skull Guardian is really hard for pure Ryziel to deal with if they don't have something like Forbidden Droplet, but at the same time, Voiceless Voice can be a pretty inconsistent strategy, and I'd assume that's enough to take it out of the meta conversation given how consistent the new decks are. But yeah, Saphira is starting to trend upwards in price slowly. It's a relatively new card from Phantom Nightmare, but it is a few sets old now. This has historically been a $3 to $5 ultra rare. We are now seeing it up at $7 to $8. I do think it's going to be a bit harder to find Saphira in your trade binders at your locals if you are looking to pick them up, but I do think that this is a card that's worth keeping an eye on. If you can find someone that's looking to pick them up, I would definitely consider offloading them while they are seeing a little bit of hype. And finally, the last card I have for today is Zodiac Barrage. So this one's more of just a formality than anything really. Personally, the only thing I thought was disappointing about this ban list is that more cards didn't peel off of the list from 0 to 1. Barrage is the only card that did so, and I really don't think it's going to impact anything at all. Barrage lets you destroy a face-up card that you control to special summon a Zodiac monster from your deck, but without Trident in the game, I don't know if this is really doing all that much. The closest thing that I can think of is maybe you could tech this card into something like Fire Kings, since it would give them another way to pop cards and trigger effects, but it's just a one-of, so it wouldn't really even add that much more to the deck. But yeah, Barrage has just 2 printings, the original secret rare from Raging Tempest, and then the secret rare reprint again in the tins. At the moment, either copy of this card is going to cost you around $5 to $6, which is technically up from the $3 to $4 that it was at before, but really isn't that much. This isn't something like when Feather Duster got unbanned, where everyone freaked out and they started buying out the card because of how impactful it was going to be, and we saw all of these crazy price jumps. Rather, it's just sort of like when Time Seal got unbanned, and everyone was like, okay, and then it didn't do anything and no one really cared that much about it. That said, if you do happen to have these in your ban binder, I'm actually of the opinion that you should keep these and there's no point in moving them for now. I actually think you should hold on to these and see if Trident ever does get unbanned, because at that point, we might actually see some meaningful movement in this card's price. Alright guys, that is all I have for today's episode. I'm still kind of like in shock because of how amazing YCS Anaheim was. I really hope that the way that they announced this ban list this time is the way they're going to continue doing it in the future, because it just creates so much more of this sense of community and hype with all of the Yu-Gi-Oh players that are at the event, and hopefully it does get more players to tune into these events, because, you know, there's the possibility of seeing this huge ban list change afterwards. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.